We have a CNN exclusive this morning.
New sanctions against Russia for what the White House says.
Was it a mistake not to anticipate this surge?
Allowing cameras in for this very close family funeral.
Παρά την τεράστια κριτική που δέχονται οι δημοσιογράφοι και τα ΜΜΕ παγκοσμίως, υπάρχουν αρκετοί λόγοι που ο τύπος παραμένει σημαντικός. Αυτά τα λέει ο κύριος Μάικλ Σάντσον, καθηγητής δημοσιογραφίας στο Πανεπιστήμιο Κολούμπια της Νέας Υόρκης. Στο βιβλίο του με τίτλο Δημοσιογραφία, ο κύριος Σάντσον υποστηρίζει πως ένα δημόσιο διάλογο που είναι πιο περίπλοκος από ποτέ, η δημοσιογραφία προσφέρει μια προσέγγιση τεκμηριωμένη και επικεντρωμένη στα γεγονότα. Ενώ στην συνέντευξή του στην Καθημερινή απαντά πως είναι αισιόδοξος για το μέλλον του επαγγέλματος σε ολόκληρο τον κόσμο, γιατί αναγνωρίζει τη φιλοδοξία και το ζήλο στα μάτια των φοιτητών του που θέλουν να εργαστούν σκληρά για να κάνουν τον κόσμο μας καλύτερο με όχημα το ρεπορτάζ. I assume that there are great lessons learned from the Trump presidency and its relationship with the press. I'm curious to get your take on whether you think that the press and traditional media will capitalize on this unprecedented clash with the Trump presidency.
My sense of just reading the press at the moment is that it's not that Trump's forgotten. He's still very important, particularly as a force in the Republican Party. But what lessons will be taken from the Trump presidency? I think that the journalists are just going about their job, feeling freer. They are freer than when they were being attacked, and in fact, violence against them encouraged by the President of the United States. That's behind us, and journalists, perhaps rightly, just say, that was a nightmare and it's gone. Our long national nightmare, as Gerald Ford once said, at the end of the Nixon presidency is over. I don't think it's quite over. I do think there's much to be learned from it, and one is that majorities can be wrong. Our system elected a man incompetent for his job and disrespectful of all the most important American traditions. The media knew he had to be distrusted from the beginning.
You write in your book that we did not live in a post-truth world, and I would like you to elaborate a little bit on that.
Yes, I may be in a minority on this, but I think once we think through it, I'm not really in a minority. That there's so much talk about the post-truth world, and back to in the U.S., back to Stephen Colbert and the Bush administration, George W. Bush administration, talking about truthiness. I'm not going to tell you the truth. I'm going to tell you what feels good to me. That was his critique of George W. Bush. So we certainly know that George W. Bush and Donald Trump were not the first presidents to lie, but there's a kind of shadiness toward a more relativistic notion of truth, like alternative facts and so on. We see that. Do we accept it? I don't think so. People run into reality. They bump into it. So I think this post-truthness is much exaggerated. Reality has enormous hold on what we can do, what we imagine we can do. And that's part of why Mr. Trump was so distressing to people. If it pleased him, if it satisfied his ego, if it made the liberals crazy, then it was fine with him, whether it was true or false.
I lived in the US 2 decades ago when cable news were becoming the trend, and viewers were starting to follow not the network news, but news organizations that were slanted, that took positions, that campaigned in favor of one or another candidate. And I guess that this is becoming a world trend. People are watching and following news organizations that are pushing their views, their interests, their own bias. I wonder if that leads us to a world where everyone reads and gets informed by his own, let me call that his own news bubble, away from standards of fairness that might have been more clear during the 90s, for example. And I would like to listen to your take on that.
Some people have said there's a revival of the partisan press. or return to the partisan press, because the 19th century newspapers in the US, as in most parts of the world, were really political party oriented, possibly subsidized by political parties, but certainly clearly affiliated with one or another party. That declined as journalism became a more powerful, independent, professionalized dimension or division within society. The professionalism hasn't gone away and stands as a rival and a rock, it seems to me. It's still a rock against partisanship, which is not to say that there isn't Fox News. There is Fox News, cable television, and on the other side of the spectrum, MSNBC, at least in my view, would be, say, the New York Times, that defends to a significant extent, defends constitutional values, liberal values in terms of we should honor diversity in our society. White supremacy is not a value we should partake of, and they will again in their fact-checking that sometimes President Biden has exaggerated a point, has misled in something he has said. That you can find that in the New York Times, even though they seem to be, on the whole, like the large majority of Americans at the moment, rather pleased with how he's handling himself in office.
Another point I find very interesting, and to be honest, I have to deal with it probably on a daily basis, is the notion of from newsworthiness to shareworthiness. We journalists, we used to produce stories that had, at least we believed, that had the news value. Now we write stories that have a sharing value. I wonder if that's a threat or an opportunity for news organizations around the world.
I think it's a threat and an opportunity. There's a line from Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice that I like, where Mrs. Bennet talks about what she does during the day. And she says, her two joys in life were news and visiting. And I realized that they're related, news and visiting. She liked news in part because it made her such a valuable person in visiting. She had something to tell. She had something juicy, gossipy to pass on. So I think that in this way, newsworthiness and shareworthiness have always been related. What's different is that journalists didn't have so much data about shareworthiness. Now they can see what gets shared and what doesn't get shared, or how much it gets shared, how many eyeballs are on their website at a given moment. So naturally makes them emphasize shareworthiness more. There are still forces against that. There's still a sense of professionalism among journalists that I think is more powerful than many people imagine. And they still will, the details of the latest Supreme Court decision are not likely to get shared as the latest sex scandal. They still report the Supreme Court.
Finally, Professor Sántsson, give me just one reason why you are optimistic about the future of journalism in the US and in the world.
One reason is that I teach in a journalism school, and I sometimes can't believe the idealism of these 23-year-olds, 26-year-olds, 28-year-olds who, from around the world, I should say, I think almost half of the students are non-American. They want to go out and make the world better by reporting information. And they're prepared by character and by ambition to risk their lives to do that. So they're an inspiration, and nothing about business models or anything else stands in their way.